Everyone, on behalf of Boston College's Pharmacia and Continuer, I offer a heartfelt welcome to you all. I wish to thank you for joining us today for this webinar to mark the close of our online program on Synodality. It's truly grace that we can be together here today, connecting from all parts of the world. And as we move from the diocesan phase to the continental phase, we appreciate the chance to reflect on our journey so far. Just for your information, before we move on, we have interpretation enabled down below. So in the bottom bar, you can see a little icon that is enabled translation. And if you click on that little icon, you can see that there are 3 languages available. There are English, Spanish and Portuguese, but in fact the Portuguese is in Italian, and we would invite you, if you wish to listen to today's webinar in any one of those languages, to click the language that is applicable to yourself. So we thank you for joining us. It's great to have so many here. Thank you very much. I now invite Father Orobator, who's a Jesuit from Nigeria, to speak to us. Father Orobator is a Jesuit from Nigeria. As I've said, he holds a PhD in theology and religious study, and he served as principal at Hikma University College, a Jesuit school of theology, and in an Institute of Peace Studies and International Studies in Nairobi. Father Orobator is president of the Jesuit Conference of Africa and Madagascar. But Father Orobator, you're very welcome. Can I ask you to tell us something about this first diocesan phase in your own country and continent? And can you share some of the experiences from your own setting and give us some insight into what has emerged there, and possibly speak into what you're looking forward to in the continental phase? It's particularly taken by your input in our course with regard to communal discernment, and perhaps you could speak something into that for us as well. Father Orobator.
Thank you very much, Janet, for the introduction. And as you said, it was a privilege to contribute to and participate in the online course. And doing that allowed me to underline some of the critical elements of synodality from the perspective of the African Church. Now, what was significant for me in terms of my experience, obviously I did not participate through kind of a local diocesan phase, but rather it was the creation, the establishment of what we call the African Synodality Initiative. And this was a process we created to enrich the very essence of synodality, of journeying together. And when we created this platform, we created it as a platform for collaborating with all the major entities involved in this synodal journey. So we created it in collaboration with the Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar, which is the platform of all the bishop conferences in Africa. We created this as a platform for collaborating with the Association of Member Episcopal Conferences in Eastern Africa, that is the regional body of bishops. And the goal in all of this was to create ideas, generate resources to support the local churches in Africa to engage fruitfully and meaningfully in the synodal process. And so what we did happened at 3 levels. First, the informative level, creating informative media productions. Second, organizing webinars for the formation of people in synodality, as the vademecum, the preparatory document, tells us, to form ourselves in synodality. And thirdly, we convened groups, particular groups, to reflect on synodality from an African perspective. So in terms of formation, for example, we've created webinars that focused on youth, the laity, consecrated women, and basically to invite everybody from within these demographic constituencies to be part of the synodal journey, to give voice to these constituencies. And following that, in terms of reflection, we convened working sessions of theologians to reflect on the themes of synodality. If you look at the documents on synodality, 10 themes are outlined. So we created a working group of theologians from all over Africa to reflect on these themes from an African perspective. We also convened the Association of Consecrated Women in Eastern and Central Africa to engage in the synodality process through a listening and discernment retreat, which I'm sure Sister Anne will be talking about later. So from these experiences, what have we seen as outcomes? First, I would say from all of this, we were able to create a resource material, which we call a pocket companion to synodality, Voices from Africa. It's a formation tool, a formation resource that it's very easy to use at all levels, parishes, small Christian communities, dioceses, basically to reflect on and to form ourselves in an ongoing manner in synodality. And of course, we also have vision statements from the theologians, from the consecrated women. All of these intended to support the process of synodality. Now, what are some of the issues that we could reference that I think is important to take note of as we go forward? First, from all the experience we've had so far, there is the ongoing need for clarity about what synodality really means. We cannot take anything for granted. We cannot presume and suppose that everybody shares a common vision of synodality. And that's why it's important to keep the conversation alive, not simply to harmonize our ideas of synodality, but to create processes that allows us to encounter one another, to listen to one another, and to engage in that spiritual discernment that is so critical to synodality. The next issue I want to talk about is that there is a very integral connection between the phases. In fact, it's a misnomer really to talk about phases, diocesan phase, continental, universal phase, as if each phase was really a task to be accomplished. Rather, it's an experience that needs to be nurtured, deepened, and consolidated for a synodal church to truly emerge. And the third point I would mention is that participation, which is also very critical to this whole idea of synodality and the experience of synodality besides mission and communion, participation needs to be declericalized. The experience I've had and through the African Synodality Initiative is there's still a very strong, shall we say, input or hold on the process by clericalism. And I might even add by episcopalism, because it's not a process that necessarily needs to be controlled, managed, facilitated by the clergy or bishops only. And that's why I think looking forward to the continental phase, and from what has been generated as a methodology, it's going to be very important that we make it an ecclesial experience rather than simply an episcopal experience. And there is a huge difference between the two. When I speak of ecclesial experience, It is precisely the kinds of things we have tried to do through the African Synodality initiative, that is to give voice to every segment of the people of God, young people, the excluded, those at the margins, women, lay people. Everybody needs to be at the table. And that's why for me, the continental phase is going to be critical. And we are working actively through the African Synodality Initiative in collaboration with the Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar and the Association of Member Episcopal Conferences of Eastern and Central Africa and the Association of Consecrated Women in Eastern Africa and Central Africa. We are working assiduously to make sure that as we prepare for the continental phase, we make it a truly ecclesial assembly, but not one that is detached from what preceded it. Because if the idea of synodality, the vision of synodality as Pope Francis envisions is true, even if we stop at this level, the diocesan phase, it is very important that the fruits of this become real, that the fruits become concrete, become integrated into the life of the church. So I feel excited about what has happened. There's a bit of apprehension, but I anticipate that at the next phase, the beauty of what it means to be people of God, an ecclesial assembly, will emerge. And that, I believe, should remain our goal so that we can truly become a synodal community of mission, communion, and participation. Thank you very much, Janet. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Father Orobator. It's been great to hear of the experience in Africa. Just before we move on to the next one, I'm conscious that some people have joined late and are maybe concerned about the translations. Down at the bottom of your bar, the little bar at the bottom, there is an icon there that says translation. And there are 3 languages that are available. It says English, Portuguese, and Spanish. We would just say that the Portuguese icon will actually translate in Italian, but that's how you can gain access to the translation. So before we move on, I would draw your attention to that. I would also ask you if you have any questions to post them in the chat. We will be having the opportunity to ask a number of those questions. So do feel free to put some questions into the chat. So with that, I will introduce to you Christina Kheng, who's from Singapore. Christina is a laywoman. She has a PhD in theology and a master's in public administration. And she teaches pastoral theology and leadership, providing consultancy and accompaniment for many religious organizations. She's a member of the Methodological Commission for the General Secretariat of the Synod of Bishops. We're very welcome, Christina. Like Father Orobator, can I ask you to tell us something about the diocesan phase in Asia? And also, can you share some of the experiences from your own specific settings and give us some insight into the topics that have emerged within your own country and within Asia? And just any other general insights in your own presentations. You gave us some great insight into the specifics of Asian culture, and we all have a lot to learn from that. So if you could maybe speak into your experience, and thank you for coming along today.
Thank you. In Asia, like in most other places, most of the dioceses have carried out the consultation process and the conversations through some synodal teams, and overall the process has been fairly well organized. After a few hitches, the usual initial uncertainty and hitches in the beginning, but throughout Asia, it's been quite orderly on the whole. The synodal teams have been mixed with laity, clergy, and religious. And they've gone throughout their dioceses to carry out the process. On the whole, there has been some quite good effort to reach out to the peripheries. When I say peripheries in Asia, the context is that sometimes almost the majority is the periphery, because we have such a large population of poor people, people on the margins, in the slum areas, also people who have left the church as well, people who are not usually included in the church. Our large majority of women, we would consider ourselves sometimes in the peripheries as well. So there has been good effort to reach out to these groups, the indigenous peoples as well. Also, there has been a good effort to use more creative ways, to use social media to reach out to the youth. And we do see quite a lot of enthusiasm in adapting the resources according to language, age, and culture. In Asia, we're really probably the most unhomogeneous continent in the world. We really don't have a common language, a common way of proceeding. And so there's a lot of translation that's needed, even in very remote indigenous dialects. But what struck me a lot was that, it's really an experience of synodality. At the Vatican, we just came up with some general guidelines, but the moment we publish it, I would say there's been a Pentecost of creativity and a Pentecost of spontaneity. And I feel that it's really a good lesson for us to learn that, the local people and the local teams can show so much creativity if only we just open up and invite them to come forward to create their own materials according to their own context. So there's even been games for kids, games in Chinese, songs, dances, cartoons in different languages, instructive videos, and all kinds of materials that were done. This really struck me a lot. And sometimes we don't give people the permission or the opportunity to really apply their creativity. But once we do, to me, this is really the sensus fidelium already operating. People show their sensus fidelium in the way they adapt the general guidelines in such a spontaneous and effective way. And they really understand the principle of synodality. Another interesting thing about Asia is the effort by some people, such as in Cambodia, to reach out to other religions. As you know, in Asia, the other major religions are very prominent, and most of us are a minority in our countries. So I know of a bishop in Cambodia who has reached out to the Buddhist group to ask for feedback as well. And the interesting thing about the feedback is that these other groups also value synodality, and they want to work with the church to promote synodality among the various religions in their country, as well as with the secular authorities. In terms of the most prominent feedback that's come up so far, I would say that I would summarize it by saying that the whole process in Asia has been about learning synodality by doing synodality. This is because throughout most countries here, authoritarianism, hierarchalism, and clericalism is still very, very strong. And the ecclesial, cultural, and political factors really reinforce each other. So for most people, to be consulted is really a first experience for them. It doesn't happen ecclesially, it doesn't happen in the family, it doesn't happen culturally, it doesn't happen politically. So, you know, I was very touched to read of stories where some women even cried at the whole process because they were just so touched to be consulted for the first time. It's really their first experience. It's a great spiritual consolation, and I feel very much we're on the right track here. The second thing about the people's experience in learning synodality is the method that was used. They found it very good. It was systematic. There was a chance for mutual sharing, deep listening, for everyone's voice to be heard. And that's really a new experience for many people as well. So it's not a surprise that in terms of the main issue that was raised, the main thing was really to ask for more synodal conversion. People realize that this is actually what's going on in this current process, and they enjoy the conversations. And they want to continue it even beyond the synod effort. Some challenges were that it's still difficult to reach a lot of people in the peripheries, to engage with people, whether the poor or middle income, because the focus of most people is really on making ends meet, on their livelihoods. So either religion is a private devotion or it's not a big part of their lives. A lot of people have stopped coming to church, and they don't see co-responsibility as something, you know, that is their role. So there's a lot of outreach and formation. Also on the part of some of the clergy, there was and there still has been some hesitation and resistance, either for fear or skepticism or compromise, or fear of compromising the orderliness of church teachings. But I think a big reason is that many are just simply very, very busy. And they have to travel to so many areas. Their parishes are very widespread. So even if they believe in the process, we must be sensitive that it is seen as an additional burden to add to their to-do list. But eventually, when they do engage in the process, I've heard many positive testimonies from the clergy. So overall, I would say that we are only beginning to learn synodality by doing synodality, but the experience has been very positive so far, and we really need to continue this momentum to work together. So I hope for the continental phase, we will find ways to work together to overcome our challenges, and most of all, to share more of our Asian perspectives to the Universal Church, to share our ways of proceeding, elements in our culture that can help promote synodality, not in the church, but very much in our society as well, which is, you know, broken by so many divisions. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Thank you, Christina, for that insight. It's been wonderful to hear that. Thank you very much, Christina. We will move to some questions. So we will. You've placed some questions in the chat there. One particular question that was asked was, related to the limitations of our church structures as they are at the moment, and a question around who will be in the October 2023 Synod. So perhaps, Christina, if I might ask yourself, is there any indications as to what form that will take, or what form the continental phase will take at this stage, or is that still being worked out?
This is still being worked out, but I think it's important to point out that this whole synod and synodality itself is really this whole 2.5-year process. Sometimes there's too much emphasis placed on the actual meeting itself. The meetings are sometimes just a couple of days or so, but the synod is really, if you look at the logo, it's really 2021 to 2023. So everyone has been invited to participate in the whole synod itself. So we must be careful not to reduce it to simply a question of who gets to come to the final meeting. It's really not about that, but it's how we continue our process of dialoguing and engaging with one another. In any case, there will be different ways to continue giving feedback and to continue the consultation.
Thank you, Christina. And I think that's a useful point to make, that we're actually in synod at the moment, and sometimes something that we confuse. Father Orobator, you had mentioned in your your presentation to us about the cultural diversity and the changes that are required. And one of the questioners has asked about the limitations of our own structures and our own church. I suppose the question is how might we how might we move beyond that? And considering that this is a journey that is continuous, could you maybe perhaps give us some insight into that?
I'm sorry, Janet, could you repeat the question, because I just lost connectivity?
No problem. Given that this is a continuous journey and that we're already in synod, there are some questions about the limitations and restrictions around our current model of church. And you spoke about the diversity and the formation that took place there. Suppose the question that's emerging is, how might we move into the next stages of this synodal journey, of the next stages of this journey, and try to mediate some of those existing structures and how we might move beyond that?
Thank you very much. I believe that, yes, there are limitations to participation, but actually, when you look at the way the process has been designed, there are channels of communication that are not constrained by structures that we are familiar with, for example, clerical structures. I just referenced the experience of the consecrated women in Eastern Africa who got together and engaged in a synodal process of listening and discerning, and also had a direct line in terms of challenging the outcomes of their conversation to the coordinating secretariat. And Sister Anne will be saying more about that later. And also the ability to create platforms where youth and women and lay people can contribute is very important, because these are open platforms for conversation. And I think that's important, that we carry on in that same spirit, that we don't feel limited, that, I only have to answer a questionnaire that is coming out of my parish or my diocese. I only need to respond to a set of questions before I can be considered to be participating. The initiative, what Christina talked about, the creativity, the opportunities are there for being creative. And that really means not just doing stuff, but also being part of the process, putting oneself in that stream of experience called synodality, even when I don't feel invited, even when I don't feel I have a place at the table where I can bring my seat to the table. And I think that's something we are capable of doing as God's own people because of our baptismal mandate. And I believe that synodality gives us this opportunity to claim that mandate, and on the basis of that mandate, be part of the process, an important part of the process. It doesn't matter whether I'm lay, woman, a man, or ordained or non-ordained, I am a member of this community-called church. And this process is a process for the people of God, by the people of God, and with the people of God. Thank you, Janet.
Privilege for me to participate in the online course on synodality, because Africa has a lot to contribute to the synodal experience from its practices of listening and discernment, as you rightly said, Ubuntu. As Father Orobator said, the African Synodality Initiative offered consecrated women a platform to practice Ubuntu, to participate in the synodal phase. So I'm glad to see the president of Akweka, Sister Rosalia Sakoyombo, on this call, and the coordinator of the African Synodality Initiative, Undanu Mungala. So speaking of my experience of the first diocesan phase, the most significant was my experience of facilitating a listening and discernment retreat on synodality for the leadership team of the Association of Consecrated Women in Eastern and Central Africa, Akweka, in May 2022 in Nairobi, Kenya. So to put this in context, the association is a regional body comprising national associations of sisterhoods or conferences of women religious superiors from English-speaking countries of Eastern and Central Africa. Akweka brings together over 35,000 sisters from over 280 religious institutes in 10 countries of Eastern and Central Africa. So we are talking about a significantly large constituency of religious women engaging in the synodal journey. The specific purpose of this retreat was to bring together the Akweka leadership to listen and discern together in order to produce a vision and a statement on synodality from African consecrated women. The leadership, you can imagine, did not just show up without a preparatory process. Each conference of religious women in the region was given a set of questions on synodality to use as a consultation resource with all their members, so that the fruits and outcome of this consultation became the materials for our reflection, conversation, and prayer. During the retreat, we used a combination of rituals, spiritual conversation, and celebration to deepen the understanding and practice of synodality, call it Ubuntu. One of the rituals that defined this synodal experience was the gospel narrative of the visitation of Mary of Nazareth with her cousin Elizabeth. We used this narrative as a synodal metaphor. Like Mary and Elizabeth, our coming together reminded us of the blessing of our vocation as consecrated women, that we are a special gift to the church. We have many talents and gifts that are important for the growth of the church. And so we are called to acknowledge, embrace, and celebrate the beauty and the richness of consecrated life and that of women in the church. So what were some of the topics that emerged from this process that I consider important? The first outcome was the realization that consecrated women are connected. They are connected in many ways, and they share similar joys and hopes. They are authentic witnesses of the gospel values in our society. Sadly, however, there are obstacles that stand in the way of their flourishing. Obstacles stand in the way of their flourishing and fulfillment as consecrated women in the church. These obstacles are many. They include, for example, the fact that consecrated women are not seen as equal members with bishops and priests, or even welcomed to fully participate in all the decision-making processes that build up the people of God, if the church is truly living out Vatican II, that the people of God. So even though consecrated women enrich the church with their ministries, with their charisms, they are not always acknowledged or appreciated. Many have suffered from disrespect, and their authority has been undermined when bishops override the decisions of general superiors of congregations, or when priests show outright disrespect and humiliate sisters in public and during homilies. More significantly, the consecrated women lamented. They lamented their experience of sexual abuse and the abuse of power and lack of response from bishops. The experience did not just end in lamentation, cry, why, oh God, why is this happening and all of that? No, having listened to the voice of the Holy Spirit as consecrated women, the sisters, Quaker, formulated a strong message addressed to the church in order to become a synodal church that journeys and works together with the gifts and talents of consecrated women. So I'd like to list the key points of this message. 1, mutual respect, dialogue, and participation of women in decision-making processes at all levels in the church. 2, addressing and eradicating all forms of clerical abuse of consecrated women. 3, recognition and respect of the rights of communities of consecrated women to ownership of land and property. And 4, the formation of priests to understand and appreciate the role of consecrated women in the church, so that the practice of synodality becomes the ordinary way of living, of walking and journeying together to foster mutuality and communion. So finally, what are some expectations that I have for the continental phase that follows? I think the first thing is the critical importance of taking up the issues that have emerged from the first phase. So whatever happens in the continental phase, we ought to deepen our commitment to the spirit of synodality as a habitual way of proceeding in the church. I think most of us have said that today in different ways. We do not need to wait until the continental phase or the universal phase before we start practicing synodality. We do not have to wait. Finally, the pain, suffering, fears, and anxieties of women religious must be heard and taken seriously, because the synodal process is an opportunity for women religious to be recognized and appreciated in the church as part of the body of Christ and as equal partners in mission. Either we listen to the voices of women, or solidarity or synodality makes no sense. Thank you.
It's been wonderful to have you all here this evening. So it has. I want to close this evening's webinar by thanking you for joining us and connecting. We appreciate the time that you've given to this conversation. It's been truly great. It's been insightful to hear the experiences, and there's been much wisdom offered from across the global church. As we close this evening's conversation, I want to thank Formation and Continuer, and especially its director, Felix Palazzi, for making this project possible. For your information, the course will continue to be available online, and we encourage you to revisit and re-engage with the material of the course. It's only the start of the journey, and there will be further as we move through our synodal journey. And as we move forward as a global church, we will come together again in the coming months and years. So thank you all for your attention this evening and for joining us this evening. It has been truly great. Thank you very much. Thank you.